מאיפה אתה? מאיפה אינתי? מזרח? בית חנינה?
בית צפאפא.
מאיפה אינתי?
בית לחם.
מאיפה אינתי?
ג'נין.
Where you come from?
United States.
I'm from that.
Why is it that Palestine has always been a source of trouble to the world? It is only 200 miles long and nowhere more than 50 miles wide. Ever since the days of the Roman Empire, this little country on the east of the Mediterranean has been the scene of wars and revolutions. Yet today the Jews are spending millions of pounds building a national home there. And on the other side, the Arabs are fighting for what they consider their natural rights in the country. What is it that causes so much trouble in Palestine?
I got very interested in Israel, went through a search for identity and found it in connection with the Jewish people. Came to Israel as a student in 1971, met Noga then, my wife.
001.
I was raised in a regular assimilated American Jewish family in New York, knowing just a little about some of the holidays and not much more. And as a teenager, I became religious, and I also became a Zionist.
Zionism is creation of the end of the 19th century. It is, first of all, a creation of a society where discrimination against national and ethnic minorities, and specifically against Jews, was an acceptable and respectable thing to do. Plus the fact that at that time it was considered that it is quite legitimate and okay for Europeans to go to countries outside Europe and settle there, whether or not the people who live there want them to do it or not.
Our decision to move here was based on religious values and religious beliefs. As Jews, we feel a religious imperative to live here. We sort of combined our religious belief and our idealism to come back to our homeland.
Here alone in history, do you have a case where a people has retained its national identity in dispersion for 2,000 years and now comes back to the land from which it's been exiled? Now, what happens? A people is dispersed, is not in any particular land anymore, is all over the place, but keeps its identity as a people. What happens to the land that they started at? Well, someone else comes in. No, people don't look at that land and say, hey, the Jews once lived here, so let's not go in there. No, people come and live there. As happens whenever one people moves from its land and leaves it, another people's living there.
We have here a situation of two peoples, each of them deeply conscious in their minds and feeling in their bones that this country is their country.
I was born in a kibbutz in the north of Israel called Kibbutz Dan. And in Kibbutz Dan there's a big museum for nature and the history of the Galilee. The museum is a very impressive building. It's by far the most beautiful building in this community. Some years ago, a friend of mine told me that he heard a rumor that this museum is built from the stones of a demolished Palestinian village. I found a very deep irony in this because it is a museum for nature and history of the Upper Galilee, and if you go inside this museum, you wouldn't know that there were ever any Palestinian or Arab villages in the Galilee. So I went on a search when I found out that it is true. The village was called Hunin, and I tried to study how a village is turned into a history museum, which tells nothing of the history of the village from which it is built of. And I think this is a metaphor for Israeli architecture, and architecture again is a metaphor also, but not only. No one knows what this place we are living in is built of, and it has no past.
This is the Gaumont British News, presenting the world to the world.
Jewish settlement in Palestine is the cause of Arab discontent. This modern city of Tel Aviv already houses 100,000 Jews who have accepted Britain's invitation to make the Holy Land their national home, apparently with success. Arab towns nearby, built in ancient Eastern style, are in striking contrast. Naturally, the Arabs, old and young, resent the influx of the go-ahead Jews. They fear that the white man, with his totally different outlook, may oust them from their own country, back to the nomadic life of their forebears, driven to seeking pasture on the desert fringe.
For so many centuries, the Muslim Arabs lived respectfully toward the Jews and the Christians because they were people of the book. And before the rise of the Jewish national movement in this country, there was a good deal of mutual respect and regard between the Muslims and the Jews. I don't think anti-Semitism is something that is a natural product or a natural thing in the Arab world, but indeed the conflict has fanned this.
I will try to make a free translation of a document that I've found during my search about the history museum in the village called Hunin. This is a document from 1948 from the Haganah archive in Israel. It says urgent, top secret, military order number 2. The enemy, the village Hunin, was partly evacuated during exchange of fire. It may be that in the meanwhile, the villagers have returned to their homes. Our aim, to enter the village of Hunin, to kill a number of men, to take some prisoners, to blow up a couple of the village houses, and to burn what can be burned. You know, the aim here was terror. But it's terror also in the meaning of making somebody afraid. So you kill some people, you just need to kill some of them, and then the people from Hunin will flee, and probably also the people from around the other villages will flee because they know that they killed some people in Hunin, and then you don't even need to go and kill some people in the neighboring villages. It doesn't even matter because they would be afraid.
Before the 1948 war, there were some 850,000 Palestinians living in the area that became the State of Israel. Of those 850,000, some 718,000 became refugees, were expelled, basically were expelled by the Israeli forces during the war.
Today in the Near East, a suffering people, the Palestine Arab refugees, are struggling for survival. 750,000 displaced human beings are dependent upon charity for their very existence. In these camps of misery live the scores of thousands whose native land was for centuries Palestine.
The expulsion of Palestinians in 48, which was a very terrible national trauma for them, and I think a very big injustice which Israel did in order to create itself, was more or less pushed aside, and saying that, oh, there is a refugee problem, but let the Arab world take care of these refugees.
The greatest battle is against infant mortality. Only 1 out of 5 lives longer than 6 months.
Between 600,000 and 800,000 Palestinians became refugees. Now, in every war there are refugees, but what is specific about this war was that the refugees were systematically not allowed to return after the war was over.
Most of these people left their homes 2 years ago in the clothes they stood up in, since they all expected to return home when order was again established. There are likely to be ugly political consequences.
The idea was to establish a Jewish state where Jews could live in safety and self-determination, but it's turned out to be the unsafest place, because you cannot come into an area where other people are living, establish a state, confiscate their lands, and expect to live in safety. And that's what happened. They came in, conquered, and confiscated.
UN Resolution 194 clearly states that people have the right to return to homes from which they were displaced during times of...
True, but in spite of those agreements, it's just not always done. It's just not always done. And it's not going to happen in this case either. So I suggest we just move on.
Special card for Palestinian refugees. Lebanese government. Ministry of Immigration. The main director for handling the affairs of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon certifies that this person is Palestinian, living in Lebanon, and in witnessing this, I have given this card. Chief Director for handling the affairs of the Palestinian refugees, Beirut.
After to 1948 until 1966, there was a long period of military rule inside the State of Israel on its Palestinian citizens. The same is now in the West Bank. This military rule was not applied to a geographical space, but to ethnicity, nationality, to Arabs.
In order to leave your village, you had to have a permit from the military governor. In order to travel from one village to another. Land confiscated, workers being forced out of agriculture, forced to become a commuting laborer population.
Between 1948 and 1966, the Palestinians in Israel were under a military government. They were under occupation for almost 20 years. 67 happens, that entire mechanism was simply transferred to the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem.
The Six-Day Middle East War echoes along a second front, the diplomatic struggle at the United Nations Security Council. While Russia and other Iron Curtain countries label Israel's victory as aggression, insisting she pull back to original boundaries, Israeli Premier Eshkol, equally adamant, insists Israel alone will determine her future.
It's not an occupation. This is liberated territory. The Arabs went to war against us and they lost. This is our territory returned by God, and we, the Jewish people, have a right to our one God-given country.
I am Israeli born. I was born in Haifa. My parents came from Germany very early, 1933, even before Hitler came to power. For a few years I worked for the Prime Minister's office. I was the Prime Minister's secretary. The Prime Minister then was David Ben-Gurion. He was one of the first people who said after 67 we should leave the occupied territories immediately because occupying is corrupting. Ben-Gurion said that, but people were so taken with this wonderful winning we had. We managed to win this war. And at the time I also believed that the war had a sense. It took me a while to realize that it was all for nothing and that it was one of the darkest moments of our lives.
I remember my family went to see East Jerusalem and to Hebron and Bethlehem and Nablus, like the new owners coming to inspect their new property.
One of these people occupies the entire country by force, deprives the other people of their political nation independence, and tries to maintain the situation by violence, because this situation can be maintained only by violence. There's no peaceful way of maintaining the domination of one people by another people without violence.
And now the Israelis have to decide, do you want to share this country with those people or not? This is the question. Now the Why I'm asking that it's an Israeli question, not a Palestinian question, because they are now controlling and leading all the country, and the keys and the decision in their hands, not in the hands of the Palestinians.
Certain basic human rights are denied by the very fact of military occupation. I mean, the government, of course, is not voted. There is no freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of organization. Beyond that, of course, the main problem is still to date the killing in large numbers of Palestinians.
Since 1967, we are in occupation of the entire country and not yet ready to recognize a Palestinian state in a part of this country, which means today we are responsible for the situation as it is.
The old concept was Moshe Dayan's concept. It was the idea that we would tie the Palestinians to us economically by bringing them into, by giving them jobs in Israel, the lowest scale jobs. Letting them come into Israel to work, to be your hewers of wood and drawers of water, your manual labor power, commuting back and forth, getting up 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning to get online, to get through the checkpoints to get into Israel for the privilege of working there, and then going back. So on the one hand, you're flooding their market, preventing the development of an economy. On the other hand, you're using their labor force, exploiting their labor force. No economy grows there.
Walking in the street and seeing an Arab walking on the sidewalk, knowing that in his pocket he has an orange ID, and I in my pocket have a blue ID. And the difference between the colors is striking, and so is the difference in the treatment. It's easy to get by with a blue ID. It's hell to have an orange ID. It's bitter life.
The whole world sees the immorality of of what we're doing and of what we've been doing since we've been occupying the West Bank for 22 years. For 2 decades, the world didn't see it because the Palestinians seemed willing to live under Israeli rule. That is, they didn't revolt. The children who grew up in that period, seeing their parents bending their heads under Israeli occupation, said to themselves, when I grow up, I'm not going to put up with this. And so began the Intifada.
Trouble begins with the sort of regulations, the open fire regulations that allow shooting in situations where the soldiers do not have to defend their lives, when their lives are not being threatened.
We've spent quite a bit of resources in trying to find non-lethal ways to deal with the Intifada. Plastic bullets, rubber bullets, sand bullets, a large variety of ways aside from tear gas and the regular ways of dispersing demonstrations.
For years, I had been looking for a way to express my feelings about the situation. I wrote a few articles for the paper. They didn't quite do the trick. And finally, the army made it very easy. The way for me to express my feelings about the situation was to go to jail. And I felt tremendous relief, a tremendous sense of lightening.
There are hundreds of them, hundreds, who refuse to serve in the occupied territories. They are not pacifists. They serve wholeheartedly in the army, but they won't take part in the atrocities.
He's also 14 years old, from Jabalia camp.
Israeli soldiers' role is to use minimal force to try to have purity of arms, of what we call moral principles, which will not be degraded or eaten away by years of intifada, by years of dealing with this type of situation, and use our force in a very selective manner and to try to have as few casualties as possible.
You use a variety of measures that are not supposed to be lethal. You have a 5.5-year experience that proves beyond any doubt that these measures are extremely lethal, that they have killed hundreds of Palestinians, hundreds of children. The question is, if a certain measure is supposed to be non-lethal, is lethal, why don't you do away with it? Why don't you change it? In the long run, respecting human rights now means even a better present, let alone future for us here, because every killing of a child means that another Palestinian would sooner or later take up arms.
Is what we see the Jews doing to the Palestinians, is that Jewish? There are two interpretations of Judaism in Israel. There are those who would define being Jewish as this: to be rooted in one another, meaning in all human beings, not just Jews, right? To be rooted in other people and not in a piece of earth. The clearest exponent of this attitude is Martin Buber. Buber summed up the whole message of the prophets from the Bible as holy insecurity. Don't give yourself the illusion of security, that you're rooted in the earth and that you have roots and therefore you're going to be secure. But be delivered over to one another so that your security depends on your maintaining good relationships with your fellow human beings. That's one Judaism. It's not the attitude that we see being exemplified by Israel's actions for the last 100 years, 60 years of its existence, and then before that.
From a distance, this Jewish colony in Palestine looks as romantic as a Dutch picture. Close to, it's different. The guards are Jewish colonists armed with shotguns. They watch all day.
There was a basement room in a very neglected part of the town, and there was there a soldier in uniform. The soldier was talking about terrible things, about executions without trial, about destruction of houses, about just stopping people in the street and beating them up, what you could call collective punishment, and all kind of terrible things. And there were people protesting and saying that's not true. Our army is not doing such things. And then the soldier said, yes, the army is doing such things. I have done it myself, and now I cannot sleep at night because I have done it.
I would suggest that the disproportionate violence is much, much heavier from the Palestinian side towards the Jews. Look what the Israelis are doing. You're murderers. At least trying to draw parity between the two sides, if not just trying to make the argument that the Israeli army is really an army of murderers, which is something I completely reject. And I think it's a good propaganda line for people who believe it.
Israelis find it hard to believe that their army does certain things and would rather either ignore the facts or attack them vehemently without actually checking them thoroughly.
You're talking now about over 3,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed over the past 4 years. More than half of those are unarmed civilians who did not take part in fighting against Israelis or attacking Israelis.
We unfortunately have wound up killing Palestinians who are innocent victims. they, the Palestinian terrorists, murder us.
They're less human, therefore we don't have to really deal with them as human beings. We don't have to relate to them as equals. When their children die, well, that's not, that's not the same as when our children die. That's racism.
When 2 children are killed, it's an accident. When 200 kids are killed, it's a policy. And you're asking me how I feel as a mother of someone who's exactly the age of these kids? I feel pretty horrible.
These black widows are traitors to the country, their God, and their people. And these traitors, every one of them are traitors, weaken the country. They're sick, demented Jews. I don't even think they're Jews. I think they're Arabs.
I'm an organizational psychologist, and when I was still doing reserve duty, I worked with soldiers who have been in a position of firing their weapons into crowds of school children. Not only is what we're doing to the Palestinians unspeakable, but what we're doing to ourselves as a people is just depressing.
I was even a soldier in the occupation army, and now I try to fix that. It's my way to fix the wrongs of Israel.
We're talking about one side that has the guns and the power, and one side that is under the gun and the power. We're not talking about equals. And people don't like when we say that they are fighting for their freedom, but that's what they're doing.
Stop referring to it as resistance and stop referring to it as fighting the occupation and say, okay, we want peace. If tens of thousands, 20,000s, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians came out into the streets and said, peace now, that would be great.
No demonstrating.
No, I am a mother and I say no shooting. Everybody has a right to exist. No more shooting. This is not right. Put the gun down. No, it is not right for you guys to be shooting anybody. They don't have guns. This is not fair. Yeah. So remember where you come. Wait.
Actually, the bullet was superficial one. It went like that and came to his arm. So it didn't penetrate to his lung. So he was lucky.
History is going to make us pay for this. This is not going to pass like nothing. We're going to pay for this. There is a price to such crimes. Even if it takes time, look at other countries. What happened? These are war crimes.
Israel is living by the sword. And I'm not a Christian, I'm not a religious believer at all, but I think that Jesus was speaking very good sense when he said that the one who lives by the sword will die by the sword.
Now the efforts of all who have labored before us bring us to this moment, a moment when we dare to pledge what for so long seemed difficult even to imagine, that the security of the Israeli people will be reconciled with the hopes of the Palestinian people, and there will be more security and more hope for all.
We have come to try and put an end to the hostilities so that our children, our children's children, will no longer experience the painful cost of war, violence and terror.
Another interpretation of Judaism is the kind of interpretation that you run into among the settlers of the West Bank, which develops a mystique of the connection of the Jewish people to the holy ground, to the earth.
We're not occupiers, we are preoccupiers. We've been here before, and we have been preoccupied with this land for the last 2,000 years.
We are here because today we're celebrating 40 years of the return of the Jewish people home to Judea, Samaria, Gaza, to our biblical homeland, the land that God gave to the Jewish people.
This is our home, this is our land. Our land is very important to us, not simply because it's physical, because it also has, I think, for many of the religiously observant Jews among us, a spiritual element in that too.
Under international humanitarian law, the status of Israeli settlements in the occupied territory is unequivocal. Settlements are a violation of the prohibition in the Fourth Geneva Convention of transferring population from the occupier's population to the occupied territory. So settlements are a violation of humanitarian law.
Illegal Jewish settlements are any Jewish community outside the land of Israel. Jews don't belong outside of Israel. It's against Jewish law for Jews to be outside of Israel. They should only live in the land of Israel and nowhere else.
The fact that Israel, in its defense, was able to gain control over this land does not mean that we owe anybody anything. This is ours, in every sense of the word.
After 67, we took land that in the Bible maybe is ours, but it definitely wasn't empty. There are people living here. Look at all these villages. This is their land.
There are sometimes claims of expropriation. We know that Arabs have won cases such as this when they can prove that the land is privately theirs.
These people have to prove that the land is theirs. Now this sounds to us European like nothing very serious. You just go and bring the papers. But this is not so here, because this country changed hands many, many times. And every time we changed hands, the system changed. And the land registration books are done by the British, by the Ottomans, and now they have to prove that it's theirs.
After 79, they found a legal theory by which they just come to the Palestinian farmer and say, we have discovered that this land is state land, so we discovered that it has all the time been our property and you have been just an illegal squatter, so now we take back our property and we chase you out.
The land that we're sitting on, working on, living on, is state land, and it doesn't belong to any private Arab landowner or villager.
They just declare a certain land as being state land, and then if it is state land, then it is open for building of a Jewish settlement from which the original owners would be excluded. Not only that they cannot live there, they cannot even go to visit them because a fence will be erected in which they will not be allowed passage for reasons of security of the settlers who are going to live there.
Israel says this now is land that belongs to the state of Israel because we don't recognize your deeds. Or if Israel says, okay, you know what, you have your deeds, we don't care, but this is land we're going to take anyway for public purposes, to build a settlement, to build a road. Or because Israel says, okay, you can think you own the land, but we're not going to let you build on it because it's open green space.
You know the green mountain there? Yeah, it was a forest. It was very green, you know.
In all the different mechanisms that Israel has, in effect, it's alienating the Palestinians from their land. Israel's actually taken about 40% of the West Bank, and it's frozen for Palestinian building 70% of the West Bank.
When the State of Israel was created in 1948, there was still the racial segregation in the United States was still a quite respectable institution. So you could say that the State of Israel was left behind. The standards of Israel are essentially the standards which were prevailing in the Western world until the end of the 50s, before Martin Luther King in the United States.
You know, in that picture you see behind me, the man with the white hair and it looks like a prophet with Martin Luther King is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. In many ways our role model of a rabbi and a scholar who is also a social activist. One of his most famous sayings was, in a democracy, some are guilty, but all are responsible.
Is this a settlement up here?
Yeah, it's Ofra.
What if a Palestinian wants to go for a walk over there?
Where? In the settlement?
Yeah.
Are you crazy?
Are there any people that are non-Jews living in any of these settlements?
Never. Never. I cannot imagine that you could ask this question.
Here in this town, the Palestinian third is being discriminated against in a very serious way because they're not represented in City Hall. The only person in City Hall who's an Arab is the one serving the tea. He's serving the tea and coffee and probably the one cleaning the toilets.
This is part of the city of Jerusalem, and the municipality doesn't give any service, municipal service in this place. Even garbage they didn't take. The minimum service that the municipality have to give to the people is to take the garbage, to collect the garbage. I don't talk about the roads. You can see the roads. I don't talk about lights. I don't talk about school services and water services. Even water, people, the municipality didn't give them. The municipality said...
No peace at all, no peace. There is no peace at all.
This is all done on purpose. Nothing of the occupation happens by chance. No, it happens on purpose. It happens in order to make the Palestinians' life a hell.
We have dehumanized the enemy as we have been dehumanized only a short time ago. We call them chaya duaglit, a two-legged animal. We are reenacting, without being able to control it, we are reenacting what happened to us as if we've never learned anything.
There are
Jewish-only roads. There are Jewish-only communities. If somebody in, let's say, Hebron,
Mm-hmm.
to come up here and buy one of these beautiful houses.
Could absolutely do so. Absolutely. There's no law in the books preventing a non-Jew from buying a home here.
Well, no. Settlements are defined as closed military zones. And now it's a funny kind of a closed military zone because you never know it. You would walk into a settlement freely without knowing that you're in a closed military zone, as would I, a citizen of Israel. It's a closed military zone that applies to a Palestinian. So not only can a Palestinian not buy or rent a house in a settlement, he can't physically enter a settlement without a special permit. There are certain areas defined as danger zones, no-go zones for Palestinians. The orders given to soldiers, any Palestinian entering those areas can be shot at. In some cases, the order is any Palestinian has to be shot at if they enter those danger zones, the areas around settlements and the areas around military bases. And we have many cases of Palestinians injured and in some cases killed simply for approaching those danger zones.
You know, there are Palestinian houses on the top of this tunnel, and they are not allowed to drive their cars, even to walk in the tunnel under their houses. It's only for Israelis.
You're not allowed to build settlements. You're not allowed to build highways that link those settlements into your country. You're not allowed to use the resources of an occupied power. Israel takes 1/3 of its water from the occupied territories, which is illegal looting of the resources of an occupied territory.
This segregation comes most manifest in the summertime, when the Jewish settlers have all this water, and the Palestinians, you open the faucet, no water. No water. One group going thirsty, while another group a few yards away is living it up with swimming pools. It's incredible.
When we talk about segregation, we're talking about electricity, we're talking about the road, we're also talking about water. There's one well here for 170 people. The village has requested repeatedly to have water hooked up to the settlement, but that's been denied. So the settlement that's less than a mile from here gets all the water that they want, where the people here are limited to well water that's actually very low.
Where are you staying? Nice hotel?
When there's hot water.
If you want, you can come to my house and take a shower. Long, great. That's the operative word. Long, hot shower, yeah.
In terms of the access to resources, to land and water, a person's ethnic origin clearly determines how much water comes out of your faucet and what access you have to land, where you're allowed to build, and how you go about getting a building permit. Across the spectrum, in the occupied territories, nationality is determining access to rights and benefits.
The occupation isn't something extra that happened in '67 because of the war. It's really an extension of where Israel was going. Israel has always claimed, Zionism, for 100 years has claimed this entire country.
יש לנו ארץ, יש לנו ים, לנו שמיים בכל צבעם, ארץ מורשת מאז מעולם, קדם המדבר לים לים.
This village cannot have electricity. You'll see there are electric wires that an NGO put in, but the Israeli military will not allow them to hook up to the electric grid. If you can imagine that kind of racism. I believe if people in the U.S. would be treated like this, we would blow up the planet. You know, I've seen the most heinous crimes committed against Palestinians, and my Israeli friends would stand with me in saying the same thing.
The fact that there are Americans who are tolerating in Israel what they would not tolerate in the United States itself, and American Jews who accept that Israel behave in a way which they would very much object to people behave in the United States itself, is very bad for Israel.
If anything has defined the American Jewish community, it's been a commitment to human rights, civil rights, social justice. You can't have that and then at the same time say, but not Israel. Israel's an exception. And that in fact is the core of anti-Semitism, is the idea that the rules apply to everybody but not to the Jews. That used to be an anti-Semitic claim. Now the Jews are claiming that.
The Israeli settlers are not under military rules. What is under military rules is only the Palestinians in the occupied territories.
From a human rights perspective, what is most problematic is that two people can be living side by side and be governed by two legal systems, where one is the legal system of a liberal democracy, like the State of Israel, and the other is the legal system of a military occupation. So I take the most striking example, Palestinians and Israelis living side by side in the city of Hebron, literally one house next to the other house. And if both of them commit the same crime, the Palestinian will be tried in a military court, the Israeli will be tried in an Israeli criminal court. And then the rights and benefits that accrue to each person in those very different legal systems are quite different. The fact of the settlements in the occupied territories has caused a range of human rights violations for Palestinians. We have seen a very severe restriction on Palestinian movement in the West Bank. That is the result of the need to protect settlements. Prior to 1991, Palestinians could walk freely into Israel with no obstacles, could travel between the West Bank and Gaza with no obstacles. Beginning in 1991, and then much more clearly in 1993, you had restrictions on travel between the West Bank, Israel, and the Gaza Strip.
120,000 Palestinian workers whom we'd made dependent on Israel, the economy of Gaza dependent on Israel for half its income, the economy of the West Bank dependent on Israel. All of you said, goodbye, goodbye. It's been nice knowing you. No more. Closed out. Collective punishment because of 15 lethal attacks on Israelis in the month of March.
Many Palestinians who had worked in Israel are now unemployed. Many Palestinians who had worked in East Jerusalem, which has been cut off from the rest of the territories, cannot go to their place of work. People wanting to go, for instance, from Bethlehem to Ramallah have a problem because they need a special license to pass through East Jerusalem.
The main fact about the closure is that Jerusalem, for the first time in history, is closed off to the Arabs of the West Bank and Gaza. That is, they can't come into Jerusalem.
Well, could you tell me about the license plates?
Yeah, the yellow ones is the Israelis. The Palestinian ones have white and green. If you drive with the yellow ones, you will not stop in the checkpoint. You will just continue driving, and the Palestinians have to stop and to be checked.
So yellow is for go.
Yellow is for go, yeah.
This is Route 60 where we are driving now. If you live on Route 60, you are really punished by God, because this is a settler's road. They all use Route 60. And any village that has an opening to Route 60 is closed by dirt mounds or by something.
This street serves the Palestinian towns, and it's blocked from long years. You know, in one side, the Israelis says that Road 60, it's open for the Palestinians. It's not apartheid, but let them go. The connection of those Palestinians to that street is blocked. This is another closure of another village. So from this village to this village, your road is blocked. It's crazy.
Leave the human rights alone. Leave the human rights alone. Let's not offend anybody. Let's let the nice little old grandmothers go through, and let's let the little school children with their backpacks go through, you know? And then, well, if the train station is blown up,
These are not major events. No one is killed and no one is hit. Just his life is made into hell. His little life, his everyday life.
Alan.
Sometimes the soldier, he close it in the middle like that. And the people, they stuck in the middle. You can't go and you can't come back. And the soldier is moody. He does whatever he wants. I have to put my ornamental thing here and to come back to check my body. Now I am there. I can rest.
It is not the case that an individual who poses a security risk is restricted and the general population is free to go about their business. In fact, the opposite is the case. The entire population is restricted, and only an individual who manages to get a permit can move around freely. That is a collective punishment.
I call it the time of the natives. It has no value. If the Israelis would have to stand like this, you'd hear it in the radio, they will get out, they will make a big fuss if they have to stand for 10 minutes and wait. This can take an hour.
I remember I was held up traveling between the United States and Canada for 10 minutes once. I was an American citizen. I think it's perfectly okay.
Did you ever get stopped between Evanston and Chicago?
Well, there's no national border, but we're talking about national borders.
I must emphasize that we are speaking about the inner checkpoints inside the West Bank.
Let us ask them how long they are staying here. العافية.
يعطيك عليه. الحمد لله عليه.
زمان لكم واقفين؟
والله بجوز انه 3 ساعات.
لا.
والله.
وحد الله.
حياة الله من ال11.
11
الا ربع. 11 الا ربع.
2 hours and 30.
The Gelbin family knows what it's like to be on a road which was open to everybody, and having a Palestinian car drive by us and then fire a submachine gun into our car, missing our bodies, but destroying the bottom half of my car.
You have your children in a zone of military conflict, which is a choice on your part, and I wonder why you do that.
Apparently the sense you have of immediate danger hovering over us, maybe your particular impression, but doesn't reflect the reality on the ground.
Well, you told me your car had been shot up with your children in it.
Yeah, but that happened once.
There are certain roads where no Palestinian can go, even by foot. If you cross it by foot and you're caught by a policeman, you have a fine, a high fine. You're not allowed to tread on those roads.
You have Palestinians not being allowed to drive on roads and Jews being shot up when they do drive with Palestinians. Maybe Jews dying, maybe isn't as important as Palestinians not being able to travel.
To keep freedom of movement for the settlers, the road blocked in the faces of the Palestinians. And the settlers are, according to the international community and Geneva Convention and everything, they are against the law, and the people suffering because them.
Every one of these roads that they can't pass is making it more difficult to get bread. They're all connected. This is all connected to one another. And it's all in the system. It's a system to make their life so miserable that they'll go away.
Is the terrorist sitting with the people in the cars now? Is the guy with the pump now sitting and wait till the soldiers now check if it's crazy. You could cross from everywhere else. You don't have to go now by this checkpoint.
They are called checkpoints, but they're really not checkpoints. They are roadblocks. A checkpoint is something where you are checked and you go. No, here you are checked and you stay.
Are you allowed to be here?
Yeah, no.
I don't think
I born here. This is my house.
Listen, you cannot be here. You're not allowed to be in here. You can go from around there, from the exit from the Kasbah there. Here you cannot be.
Tell your commander that I want to visit my house.
Listen, sir. I'm not having a discussion with you right now. I need you to leave here.
The suffering of millions of innocent people who have done no harm whatsoever, ever in their lives, and have to succumb to this every single step they take. There must be some better way to prevent terrorist acts. People get so frustrated that the hatred goes to such degrees that, of course, there were terrorist acts.
If a train station is blown up, if a plane station is blown up, do you know, like, at what point do you say that a basic right that I have is to travel safely in my town?
And of course, they're the terrorists and we're the victims. Everything is turned on its head. The occupying power is the innocent victim, and the oppressed people are the perpetrators, and it works.
Rather than say, well, let's talk about the checkpoints, I would say let's talk about the terrorism. Why was there terrorism to begin with? Why was terrorism ever considered to be a legitimate form of resistance or a legitimate form of political pressure on the state of Israel?
It became clear that peace negotiations were simply a mask for an attempt to gain time while continuing to put settlers into the West Bank so as to create a de facto situation where there'd be no possibility for anything like a Palestinian state ever coming into being.
Oslo started in 1993, and why the Intifada started again at the September 2000? Because 7 years after Oslo, the Palestinians don't see nothing on the earth changed And they said, hey, it's bullshit.
In fact, the settler population doubled during the Oslo process. So for Palestinians, the view from their window of increasing settlements, along with the human rights violations that settlements created, all of that continued despite the Oslo process.
Their agriculture's been destroyed. 18,000 houses have been demolished. 70% of the land has been expropriated. You've got 300 Israeli settlements on Palestinian land.
Israeli Jews, I don't think, have the right to complain about how backward and primitive and cruel, etc., the Arabs are, as if they were. But that's the image. That's the result of the demonization. You can complain all you want about it. You chose to live here. You chose to come here, to put yourself here. And now you're saying you don't like the neighbors? They were living here when you put yourself here. So be ready to talk with them, to deal with them, instead of thinking that you're going to get them to do your will by hitting them enough over the head. It doesn't work.
They fight for their independence using all means, and the state of Israel tries to suppress them, also using all means. And you understand the meaning of the term all means.
אין מה ללכת, חברים!
Israel wanted to build a wall to protect itself against suicide bombings. And after all, doesn't any nation have a right to build its boundary any way it wants to, as long as it's on its own territory? It's not like that. The wall's being built on Palestinian territory.
You now have the construction of the separation barrier, justified to prevent Palestinians from entering Israel, although of course the route of the barrier where Israel has chosen to build it is mostly inside the West Bank in order to safeguard settlements and even to ensure the future expansion of settlements. The barrier is encircling empty lands and settlements inside the West Bank, causing further hardship to Palestinians.
Yes, we have real and legitimate security needs. Yes, building a barrier could be a legitimate way to help protect Israelis. But the root of the barrier, as now constructed, disproportionately and unnecessarily violates Palestinian human rights and international law.
You know, the International Court at The Hague condemned the course that the wall is taking, because Israel, very unwisely, I think, chose to build the wall inside Palestinian territory, thus annexing large swatches of Palestinian land. Israel ghettoizes the whole population in and doesn't even build its wall on its own territory.
The Israelis had a very big, dirty opportunity for land grabs under security excuses. And you see that the wall built just beside the houses, they touch the houses, and all their properties, their lands, still outside the wall. This is the dream of the Israeli authorities, a land without people. So you see the people still in one side, the land is still and stolen by the Israelis.
This wall is basically a Western wall, a European wall, separating Israel as the kind of the last foot of Europe set into this area. And then we have this wall, and there, from beyond it begins the dangerous East, which we don't want to see and don't want to have anything to do with. That won't work. It won't work.
Another form of collective punishment, which is much more explicit, is the demolition of Palestinian houses. There are 3 different forms of house demolitions taking place in the occupied territories. The first is what Israel calls a deterrent house demolition, and these are the demolition of houses of Palestinians who have been involved or are suspected of being involved in violent activities against Israelis. Most of the perpetrators are either dead or in prison, so they are not being punished. Who is being punished is the person's family. There is no way to understand these kinds of house demolitions except as a collective punishment. Even if the person is a murderer, the people being punished is the murderer's wife, the murderer's children, or brother, or parents, or neighbors. Most of the victims of this policy are children.
The policy of demolishing Palestinian homes didn't begin in 1967. In 48 and after, Israel demolished more than 400 entire Palestinian villages inside Israel. 2/3 of the villages of Palestine were demolished by Israel.
The government afraid that this village will expand toward the Pisgat Ze'ev Jewish neighborhood. So in order to stop the expansion of the village, they demolished all the houses in this periphery. So the idea is that the Jewish, they have the right to expand. The Palestinians know. In fact, the Jewish neighborhood of Pisgat Ze'ev are in Palestinians' lands. The people that live there before the settlements have been Palestinians. They lived there for generations. So to come and to say, I'm sorry, Muhammad, this belongs to the state, go on and we will build here a settlement for Jewish alone, this is a crime, this is racism, this is segregation.
The building is continuing, and we feel very confident that the idea of a return of the Jews to the land of the Jews, despite the political differences and the security problems, all this is continuing and growing and expanding.
This house, they demolished 2 weeks ago. There are 24 members in the family, and they live peacefully. They are not terrorists, they are not criminals. It's a shock. It's a traumatic moment for the family, and especially for the kids.
The kids are tremendously traumatized. Do you imagine just getting up in the morning, having breakfast, trotting off to 3rd grade, coming back at 1 o'clock for lunch? There's no house. It's the stuff of horror movies. I've seen kids go into convulsions. Here you come over the hill and your house is gone. Your house is gone, you don't see your parents, everything familiar is missing. You know, and kids, they enter into a trauma and a panic that I think that has to last with them for their whole lives.
More than 20 children live here. If one of them one day will be a terrorist, who can מי יכול להאשים אותם? How you say in English?
The most widespread form of house demolition is what Israel calls clearing operations, or houses demolished during military operations. This has taken place on a very large scale in the Gaza Strip, and most dramatically in Rafah, where what was once a very densely populated refugee camp, now a sterile strip has been created on the border with Egypt. Hundreds and hundreds of houses demolished there.
Clear that it will not be peace if we continue to demolish houses of innocent peoples. But what is more dangerous is what this do to the Israeli people. So you're right, to the Israeli soldiers, to the Israeli civilians, because we become from year to year more animals.
شافت فوق ليش قاعدة بدي ما بدي ادخل البيت واو اتصل بالشرطة شو جابك انت على هالصبح الله يجيبك شو بتعمل لحالك لحالك
They're trespassers. The Arabs are trespassers in the land of Israel. It's not their country. They have 22 countries. Let them go live in their own country. The land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, not to the Arabs.
The idea is your security lies in implanting yourself in the earth. And so we have this movement, the Zionist movement, and it's no surprise, therefore, when we find Judaism as it expresses itself in Israel, to be an earth-rooted movement, not a people-rooted movement. And to behave in the way that earth-rooted movements have always behaved towards strangers in their midst.
Religion and politics have gone interwoven here in an immoral way. It's immoral what they do with religion, to my mind. And it's not Jewish, it's un-Jewish.
There is a way leading from humanity through nationality to bestiality.
My appeal to my fellow Jews is to remember that we're responsible, here more than anywhere else. It's easy to be for all kinds of wonderful values in the diaspora. This is the acid test. This is the reality test. To all these values that we've held for all these generations.
I think the American Jewish community has played a very dishonorable role in this whole thing. You know, Israel claims to speak for them. And they accept that Israel is our country in one way or another. It's a Jewish country. It speaks for the Jews. It represents the Jews. And so that makes them complicit in all these human rights violations.
There's an enormous American responsibility for this situation here. So I don't think Americans can sit back and, as if they were simply observing the situation from afar, with a kind of lordly distance, as if they had no part in it. It's because of that American veto in the Security Council that Israel is able to go on acting in the way it has, which I think will lead to its own destruction if it's allowed to go on like this.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Israel.
This occupation is not conceived as an Israeli occupation. It's perceived as an American Israeli occupation. And it's clear that Israel couldn't maintain this occupation for a month without the political and military and financial support that the United States offers.
God will give strength to his people. God will bless his people with peace. Thank you very much.
The very attitude that Israel has a kind of sanctity, holiness to it, and must not be criticized, enables Israel to perform actions which make it a very unsafe place for Jews to be, and which also make the world an unsafe place for Jews to be.
We are fantasizing at nights on how they'll mutilate us and kill us. We are doing it, and we are fantasizing how it would happen to us. This is, seriously, this is what we're doing. And to overcome this, we must meet the enemy as a human being.
Hi, my name is Shireen. I'm from Gaza.
The Gaza Strip, a space only 22 miles long and 5 miles wide.
I'm Palestinian from Gaza, which is considered as a big jail.
That's about the fourth explosion. All over the city, dogs are barking.
Death is around you, always around you.
Last night, large numbers of people killed, but now I hear the ambulances running.
Can you imagine this feeling that I feel always when we are bombed?
Apache helicopters hovering up there. It's happening just at bedtime here, 9 o'clock at night, just when the kids go to bed.
This feeling, exactly this feeling, that you are in your room, in your bed, you're praying.
Here we are again. The chopper's very close this time. Comes another bomb. It's going to explode.
You're praying because you feel that your room, only your room will be bombed from the whole building.
Here comes another one fired from a much lower angle right off to my left. They're coming right down across the town. It's 3 a.m. and killing is going on. Imagine, the United States paying for all this.
You have to be a human being who understands that other people are also human beings and that you can't punish a whole society.
The war, as Israel calls it, against the Palestinians is really a war against the Palestinian people. The Palestinians don't have a state, they don't have an army. This is a war against people, and it's against people who are fighting for their freedom.
You know, we would like to have a Jewish democratic state, but we're stuck with the Arabs that don't want to go away. So I say, forget it. Jewish democratic state may have been a dream for a while, but you know, let's leave it now. You can't have an ethnic democracy. You know, what is this ethnic democracy? It's called ethnocracy. You know, so I don't believe in it. I think it's a lie. And now, if somebody would come and tell me, look, Tomer, I would like to have an apartheid state where a small Jewish minority rules over a large Arab majority. So, you know, what can I say? Okay.
The prognosis is that the majority of people living west of the Jordan River will be Arabs. Israel's ruling over a group where the majority will be Arab.
Israel's locked into this apartheid position, that it can't get rid of these Palestinians, but in order to control the entire country and get them off our hands, we have to have a Bantustan. It's exactly the same logic as South Africa.
If we went by the option of going by taking all the Arabs and moving it into one place, if we went by the option of saying that it would be a combined state, if we went any options, they're not dealing with the core of the problem. The core of the problem is educating democracy.
I've lost my patience for this double face talking about Jewish democracy. Doesn't work anymore. People come and say, well, you know, you need to understand things are complicated, there's things here, there's things there, and I say it's bullshit. Things are
not complicated, they're simple, and things are black and white. Either you believe in democracy or you believe in a Jewish state. And everybody has to make his choice, and I made mine. And I urge everybody else to make theirs.
What was your choice?
Democracy.
When they saw what they had done, they gave the Gazans 41. Stay cool. Stay cool. Contortionists and hustlers weigh the pros and cons of Judas' pay, then turn and look the other way, but still they have the nerve to say, stay cool. Stay cool. Stay cool. Stay cool. Stay cool.